on to our next story here. We're going to talk about underemployment. I've been trying to send the signal for quite some time that even though the Biden administration has been telling you that the economy is doing great, I've been trying to explain to you not so much, and not just in reference to the prices. One of the things that they've been bragging about is the job market. And they say that Joe Biden has created all of these jobs, but they never told you what those jobs were. Well, tonight, you're going to hear from Professor Richard Wolff about underemployment in the United States, and in particular, a certain group that it's affecting, and that is college graduates. Believe it or not, college graduates are dealing with underemployment. Let's get into it.
That shows that 52%, that's more than half, of recent college graduates found jobs for which only a high school diploma was an adequate preparation.
Pause. What did I tell you guys? Because you see, a lot of these jobs that have been created are not professional jobs that these students are qualified for. A lot of these jobs involve retail, the restaurant industry, right? Jobs that are not paying as much as you would think they were. So yes, people graduating from college are getting jobs, but according to that study from the Higher Ed Report, which I'm going to show you, 52% of college graduates are underemployed. So they are accepting jobs that are actually they're overqualified for. Now, why would they do that? They do that when you're desperate. You do that when you cannot find a job that meets your qualifications, but you have bills to pay. We also have to remember that student loans went back into repayment. So they have to pay those student loans. So you have to work somewhere. You got to pay rent. You got bills to pay. I tried to warn people about this.
Or in the language of economics, more than half of recent college undergraduates are underemployed. Okay, I want you to look at that with me. It means that those young people who took the time, the trouble, and spent the money, often borrowed money, to get a higher education, find themselves at the end of it with enormous debts, with huge hopes and expectations, but unable to get a job adequate to what they can do, to what they have been educated to do. That is a social failure. That means there's something about the economic system in which we live that is very badly misorganized. And
Pause here for just a second. And another thing I want to add as well, I'm very familiar with this because this happened to me, right? So I've talked about this before on this show, but, the housing crisis really messed things up, and not just for the year 2008. Like, this was a problem for years. I would say multiple years after 2008. It continued for quite some time. Some would still tell you that we're still trying to recover from the housing crisis of 2008. You'd have to talk to an economist more about that, and they can give you a lot more data. But I remember this all too well. Graduating from college, you have your degree, but the economy is in the pits. You're going through a recession. There's the housing crisis. So the jobs that you're actually qualified for aren't hiring anybody. They laid off some of the people that they already had. And then something else happened. The weird thing that happened is that you had the Gen X generation, and they were basically getting some of those jobs that some of the millennials were qualified for, or they had those jobs that millennials were actually qualified for during the housing crisis. So something changed in reference to the job qualifications. All of a sudden, positions that were entry-level positions, meaning that all you needed technically was a bachelor's degree and they would train you. All of a sudden, those positions, the requirements changed to must have 3 to 5 years experience. All of a sudden, the entry-level positions were no longer entry-level. And that is because you had people that were of retirement age during that time that were afraid to retire because of the housing crisis, because of the recession. So they stayed in their jobs, whereas otherwise they most likely would have retired. That means that people who were part of the Gen X generation, they were now in those jobs that were entry-level jobs that the college undergraduates should have been receiving. But because the Gen X generation, because they stayed in those jobs, that actually increased the requirement for you to qualify for those jobs to 3 to 5 years experience. For those who are wondering, that's where that comes from. So for those of us that were millennials, we were just kind of screwed. So we took whatever jobs we can get. And what were those jobs? Restaurant industry, whether you were waiting tables, whether you were bartending, those kind of jobs, because they'll hire you because they're going to train you anyway. Retail jobs, which actually don't make that much. Do you know the average middle-aged woman in this country is working a retail job, which does not pay that much? And this is part of the reason why my generation has been kind of kept behind when you talk about accruing any type of wealth in this country. That's part of the reason. That ain't all of it, but that's part of the reason. Got to go back to that '08 housing crisis. So I'm very familiar with this. I remember having a college degree and working 2 jobs. And no one goes to college so that they can work 2 jobs. No one goes to college so that they can struggle and they can make minimum wage. And that's what was happening during that time. And here we are again. And I've been trying to warn people that this was coming. In fact, I knew part of this because I worked in higher ed for so long. But Professor Richard Wolff actually warned me himself about this on this show 2 years ago. He warned me what was coming. And here we are.
I'm being as polite as I can. Here are some of the facts you should know. If you start off your post-college job career life underemployed, the statistics show you will be paid less than you ought to be for the rest of your life. In other words, you're starting in a place that's going to hamper your income and the life you can lead for a long time.
And this is why more college graduates that are graduating from undergrad are choosing to go to grad school. I watched it over the years. I worked in higher ed for over 10 years. I watched it over the years. The number of graduate applications would continue to increase. And this is very common when the economy is in a rut. When the economy is in a rut, that's actually great for college admissions, particularly those of us that advise students in the graduate courses, because those college applications increase. People will go back to school because they know they're not going to get a decent job. The bad part about that is it often means you're going to have to take out more student loans. So then you end up in more debt. But the idea is that you'll have that advanced degree so you can get a better job and you'll make a higher salary. So by the time you finish the graduate program, you'll be able to go out there and get a professional job and you're going to make more. So it's going to pay off. But does it? From my experience, it didn't. So you'll see this happening where graduate admissions are going to go up. The applications are going to increase. Happens every time we tend to run into this type of economic situation or there is a recession. That's not uncommon. So just FYI.
It's not just the beginning. It also means that more and more young people are going to question going to college. I mean, if I spend 4 years and I spend all the money and I do all the work and I still don't get a job that can't be gotten by a high school graduate that doesn't need, in any general sense, what I just did. You know what that's going to do? It's going to continue what we're already seeing, declining enrollments in colleges and universities.
That's in reference to undergrad. And that's another thing that's happening. People don't want to be, weighed down with student debt. There's also alternative programs that you can do nowadays. Like you really don't have to go to a traditional college these days. Now, I would forewarn you about enrolling in universities like the University of Phoenix, Be careful with those not-for-profit colleges because they're just a money grab, and they will charge you like $5,000, $6,000 for one course that a traditional university is not going to charge you that much for that one course, particularly if it's a state school. So beware of those. But there's other things that you can do. I mean, it's if you're going into the tech field, there's boot camps. So I know people that have done coding boot camps. Some people say they're good. Some people say they're not. I think you got to find the right one. To be honest with you. So that's part of the issue that you'll face. There's been other things like Launch Academy. There's another one. I feel like General Assembly. That's another one. General Assembly, 2 years versus 4 years. And they just put you in the courses that you need for your degree. So you don't have to take all these extra classes, like the core classes, like I had to take when I was in undergrad. So people don't want the student debt. They're seeing what's happening to the generation before them. There's also trade schools. There's other things that you can do. The point that I'm trying to make is we may have gotten to the point in this country where it's no longer about you finding a job that you're passionate about. It seems like it's more now about you finding a job or you going into a field that is not going to cause you any type of extra debt, meaning student loan debt, but can still pay your bills.
A level of educated population that shrinks because many things happen in the 4 years of college. A lot of learning goes on in the dorm room, in the life you lead, yes, and in the classrooms, and in the interaction with other students that are spending time in classrooms and reading. There's a benefit to society that we've always understood that is going to be lost as more and more people choose against a life in a society that's misorganized in this way. The whole social structure will be affected. Colleges and universities are going to have a harder time than they already have meeting their financial obligations because they're not getting the students and therefore not the tuition and not the room and board and all the rest of the income they rely on now more than ever in the past.
And something I want to add here as well, I want you to think about even canceling student loan debt. And I swear I've argued with people about this on social media. Even canceling student loan debt, the problem that you still have is that colleges are continuing to increase tuition. So canceling student loan debt doesn't solve the problem. There's no cap on these colleges. There's no cap. Where are we in this country where the University of Massachusetts, which is a public state school, this is not a fancy college, it's not a private school, now costs just as much as some of the private colleges in a place like North Carolina? How did that happen? How did it happen that these state schools, first of all, if you are in state, so if you live in Massachusetts and you want to attend a state college, public state college, why are they charging you tuition? Somebody let me know. I should have created a poll about this. Think about it, folks. It wasn't always this way. But if you are in state, I don't care whatever state you live in, if you live in North Carolina and you decide to attend a public state college in North Carolina, not out of state, why are they charging you tuition? I can understand if they want to charge you room and board because you are living there and you are using the facilities, electricity in the dorms, etc. But why are they charging you tuition? You already have to pay for the books. Just another way to make money.
It's going to problematize the finance. You see the social consequences? The society that fails to provide really adequate jobs to its college graduates is pushing itself downward in the level of social development. It's shooting itself in the foot. It is hurting itself, and it shouldn't be done, and it shouldn't be allowed, and it's something we all ought to understand because it's a problem that will impact us in 1,000 ways as it unfolds, and it is getting nowhere near the attention and the critical awareness that it deserves.
People got to understand that, like, it's changed. Jack says, is a state college the same as a community college? Community colleges are 2-year institutions. So, for example, a friend of mine is a dental hygienist. She went to a community college to get that degree. It's an associate's degree. But actually, she started out making a pretty good salary for going to community college, just FYI. Whereas the state schools are typically the 4-year public colleges. So it's really interesting. I want people to understand, and I want to show you what that study actually says, because Richard Wolff bringing light to this, it says a lot. You bring this up here. This is the study that Richard Wolff is referring to. It is the Inside Higher Education study. More than half of recent 4-year college grads are underemployed. So a new report found that many recent graduates don't land jobs that require a degree. Like I said, a lot of these kids, they end up waiting tables or working a retail job. Sales is another one, which a lot of the sales positions don't require a 4-year degree either. And they train you. So it goes on to say here, a decade after graduation, 45% of them still don't hold a job that requires a 4-year degree. So they're saying, going a step further, 10 years later, 45% of these kids still don't have a job that requires that degree. And then add on top of that, if you have student loans, now you got to pay back these student loans that you acquired for attending this university to get this degree that you're not even going to get a chance to use. So think about that as well. It goes on to say that the report defines underemployment as holding a job that doesn't require a bachelor's degree, signified by at least half of employees in that role not having one. Colleges and universities, states, and our country can do more and should do more to help students prepare for the critical transition from college to the labor market. Now, that's coming from Stephen Moret, president and CEO of Strata Education Foundation. Okay, so Stephen, if you feel that colleges and universities should do more to prep these students for the transition from college to the labor market, I agree with you about that. But here's the problem. Number one, we need to have more free internships, or excuse me, not free internships, more paid internships in this country. One of the problems that people like myself and other colleagues of mine that we went through is that a lot of the internships that give you that transition into that field of yours are unpaid. If you're coming from a working class family, I know I was not able to just stop working when I was in college. So I worked when I was in college and I worked during the summer. So if I were to take an unpaid internship, that would mean that I can't keep the job that I have. So this whole idea of unpaid internships is just another way for companies to get free labor. That should not happen. More people need to push back on that. What do you mean unpaid? Pay these kids. They're working. So there's that. So unpaid internships, and there's more unpaid ones than paid ones, those actually hurt students that are coming from working class families and middle class families, and particularly students that had to take out student loans. That's one thing that needs to be fixed. And then two, these universities need to stop offering degrees that actually don't produce jobs. And people can say whatever they want, but it is what it is. The history degrees, psychology degree, I got a degree in philosophy. A lot of these, this is why some of the liberal arts colleges are continuing to close, because you're offering degrees that are no longer marketable. These kids can't get jobs. But first step, all internships should be paid internships. No more unpaid internships. The report found that graduates who started their careers at a below college level job typically stayed underemployed for years afterwards. The majority of graduates, 73%, who are underemployed in their first jobs remained so a decade after they graduated. In contrast, 79% of graduates who started off in a college level job continued to hold jobs at that level 5 years after graduating, which makes sense. You already got your foot in the door. And other graduates who held college level jobs 5 years after graduating, 86% had college level jobs a decade out. And another thing that's been happening as well, and I noticed this just being an advisor, I worked very closely with the career counselor. So I would tell him the information I had, and he would tell me the information that he had. And one of the things that I noticed is that a lot of the kids that were graduating, I would say within the past 10 years, that did get those jobs, they were more likely to probably leave that company or that position within the first 1 to 2 years. Now, why is that? It's not because they don't want to work hard. It's not because they're not dedicated. It's because they want to make more money. And the fastest way for you to make more money is to move around. This is why you see that happening more often with Gen Zers. That wouldn't happen if these companies would go back to the model that they used to have, where they actually promoted employees after a first couple of years, where they actually gave a raise based on your performance and not just this standard baseline 2% wage and everybody gets the same wage. Again, that goes back to equality and equity. Because if everybody gets that 2% base wage, but some people are working harder than others, and then you have some people who are already making a higher salary, yeah, you got equality because you gave everybody a 2% wage, but you don't have that equity. So these are a lot of things that we need to talk about. Not giving them promotions, so that's why they move around. And also the cost of living is much higher. For my generation, wages did not adjust for inflation. So in order to make more money, that's what you have to do. You have to move around. And you'll see that happen a lot more often. And yes, hiring bosses, they get really upset about it. It pisses them off because they're like, I hire these kids and they stay here for 1 year or 2 years and they go somewhere else. How much are you paying them? Do you know how much rent costs in Boston? Don't you know we're dealing with inflation? Don't you see the grocery store prices? Don't you know these kids have student loans? What do you expect them to do? Go back to the days where you used to give employees a pension. When my dad and my grandparents, they mentioned pension to me, I was like, oh, what? A lot of these companies are not giving people pensions anymore. Those days are long gone. They want you to do a 401k. And if you're making a low salary and you have student loan debt and you have expensive rent, whether you have 4 or 5 roommates or not, the last thing you're going to do is take part of your paycheck and put it into a 401k. Just telling you from experience. But they moved away from pensions and implemented 401ks. Excellent discussion there from Professor Richard Wolff.